Welcome to Conversations with the Candidates, Election 2019, brought to you by iBerkshires.com in collaboration with the Northern Berkshire Community Television. Over the next 5 episodes, we will meet the 14 candidates running for City Council in North Adams. The top 9 vote getters will be seated as the new City Council, and so we hope to bring you some insight into who the candidates are. Now, here are the candidates. With us this episode, we have Keith Bona, Lisa Blackmer, and Roger Urban. And Roger, we're going to start with you. Why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I graduated from North Adams State College in 1964 with a BS in secondary ed, minors in English and history. From there, I went into the Navy. I served 8 years. My final rank was lieutenant, which is the same as a captain in the other services. I was responsible for as many as 40 enlisted men. I served 2 tours in Vietnam, received a commendation for saving my department over $250,000 during a ship overhaul project. From there, I went into, when I got out of the Navy, I spent 32 years with a Fortune 500 company. I was responsible for hiring, training, and managing over 30 people, developing and training and managing budgets up to $12 million. I formerly served on the North Adams Cemetery Commission and as the Veterans Graves Officer, and I think most people know that I created the Hillside Restoration Group.
And this is your first time running for office?
No, it isn't.
Okay, so what was
I hope it's my first successful time.
For a successful one, okay. Did you run a write-in campaign the last time?
Sort of.
Sort of. It was last minute, but you made a try for it.
Right.
So this is the first time your name is going to be on the ballot, right?
I was on the ballot last
Oh, you were the
yeah.
ballot. Okay. I take that back. I apologize. For
That's
some
all
reason,
right.
I kept thinking it was a write-in.
It might as well not have been, but I was.
Oh, okay. Okay, and we have Lisa, who is a former counselor who's been off for 2 years, right?
Yes.
About 1 full term, and you're trying to come back on. And remind everybody who you are.
So I'm Lisa Blackmer. I am a 33-year resident. I moved my family here 33 years ago, last week actually, and we thought we'd move back, wondering how we were going to get out of a 3-year variable mortgage, and instead we decided to stay here. And we've been very passionate and very involved in the city. And again, we could have moved anywhere in the state, but we decided to stay here in North Adams and raised our family here. I have a degree, 2 degrees from Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. I have an undergraduate degree in business administration with a concentration in economics and finance, and an MBA. I recently completed a certificate program from Suffolk University, a master's level certificate in municipal management, administration, and leadership. A lot of words for one thing. And I just passed the treasurer's exam. So for the last 33 years, I've worked in public administration and finance in municipalities. I've worked in retail and the private sector, and I've worked in nonprofit organizations. I've got 2 kids, 3 granddaughters, a couple of cats, and I've obviously been married for almost the 33 years I've been here. And I served on the first school council back in '93 after ed reform, when they established the school councils. So I've got a background in kind of municipal government from from all 3 areas, from being an appointed person, because I'm on the planning board right now, being an elected official with my 10 years on the city council, and also spending the last 3 years as a treasurer tax collector, but I was also a town administrator and an accountant. And I also, when I was on the city council before, I spent several years on the board of the Mass Municipal Association, including serving as the vice president, and then immediate past president, while serving on another policy committee that was basically public administration. Everything that wasn't on another committee got dumped into our committee.
Okay. Wow. Okay. All right, Keith. All right. How many terms have you served this time around?
Well, probably some people might say too many. This would be going into my sixth term.
Sixth term, okay. And you'd been on the city council earlier in the 90s.
I
for a
got
while.
elected
Right.
in 1993. I was just a little pup,
Yeah,
and my son at that time was barely walking, and now he works for the sheriff's department, so.
and just
that
got
shows-
engaged,
yes,
right?
he just got engaged. My experience on the council is obviously beneficial, as it is Councilor Blackmer, but, there's nothing wrong with having new blood and fresh energy constantly coming in. So I think it's a positive thing for the council to continually have rotation. But right now, we have a young council. I think when Councilor Blackmer and myself were on, there was more that had some experience, but I think overall it's a pretty young council. That doesn't mean they're not experienced and can't do the job, but there is something to be said about when you have councilors that can bring in things that they've worked on in the past, when you have that kind of discussion.
So tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. It's long. I'm going
Yeah.
to keep it very abbreviated.
Yeah.
I graduated from Rochester Institute of Technology. I was involved in so much in college that when I came here, I just jumped into many things. I was one of the founders of the United Neighborhood Organization. I would say that was really the spark that got me to jump into city council. Since then, I've been on numerous health and human service boards, art boards, business boards, organizations, clubs, everything, social clubs, Elks, things like that. So it's a long list, but we'll just keep it like that. And, I've served, I think, on every committee on council and, currently, president, but I sort of like sitting on the floor as much as, probably more than I like being in the presidency. Yeah. Yep.
So why are you running again then?
Again, it's still a young council. We have some open seats. I think it's beneficial that, we have some councilors on there that can bring some of that experience. I wouldn't want to see a council that's all brand new candidates. We still have a young administration too. So I think it's important when you have knowledge and experience that like Councilor Blackmer and myself have had and worked on in the past. I will say this, I think Councilor Blackmer and myself, we probably worked on, I would say, the toughest budget this city has seen in, I bet you, 40 years. I mean, when you go back 10 years ago, it was not pretty, and we had to make some tough decisions. And, people probably didn't like us for it, but at the same time, you do need counselors on there that can't just always be happy thoughts and give everyone rainbows. There have to be times you got to make tough decisions that people will get angry with us.
And Lisa, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I remember we basically depleted, after the 9C cuts of the Deval-Patrick, administration, we ended up, and this was actually at the end of '09 before the new council took over, we had to deplete our reserves because the state cut our budget in the middle of the fiscal year.
Right.
So we came into a budget with with our reserves depleted, but also had a $800,000 loss, gap, whatever, in our health insurance. So we were dealing with that, and it was difficult. It was one of the more difficult budgets. Obviously, I remember people saying, "I don't know how we're going to do this."
Right. And the 9C cuts, just so everybody knows, it's part of Massachusetts general law that allows the governor in budgetary crisis to do line item cuts across the board. And that hit a lot of municipalities in the middle of their budgets that have already been set, and you know what you're going to spend, and suddenly you can't spend it. It's almost like losing your job in the middle of the year after you decided what you're going to go on vacation or something. I mean, it can be devastating. So considering that, I mean, you and Roger both have pretty intensive financial backgrounds in terms of overseeing things, right? I mean, you're the town treasurer and you work for a Fortune 500 company. I'm going to go to Roger on this one for just a bit. So what do you see with the city budget that you think you can bring to that from just the experience that you have?
I think one of the things that I would do is go over the budget with a fine-tooth comb to see if there's any fat in the budget, if there's any place that we can reduce the budget expenditures to a degree. But it's a difficult proposition in these days because all prices of everything is going up, and the city has to buy things,
Right.
fuel and you name it. So I think we have to look at that budget very carefully. We don't have a lot of resources.
Right. And Lisa, you were chairman of the Finance Committee during one of your terms.
And I was on the Finance Committee for several of those years,
yeah.
and having looked at that budget, I don't think there's fat in it. I think the problem is the revenue side. It's, one, and we talked about the 9C cuts and how that impacted, but communities like ours who had a large amount of, somewhere between 40 and 50% of our budget came from the state makes a cut, it has an undue impact on us compared to some of the other communities that don't get a lot of state aid. But I do think that we have to grow the tax base. That's the only way we're going to solve we can't cut our way out of this. We have to grow our way out of it. There's just so many needs. We've got infrastructure. There is a capital plan out there. Obviously, it gets off track when you don't have the money, but we really have to get back to it. And whether it's a normal replacement schedule for vehicles, or I know that the infrastructure back when we had a capital plan that Mayor Alcombright put together, we're talking $20 million for infrastructure. We need a police station,
yeah.
and everybody's like, "Oh, get the grant. Why did you build the center and spend all the money on rehabbing the armory? Why didn't you build the police station?" Well, because you can't build a police station with community development block grant funds. And so I guess my background in finance is municipal finance. I know the process. I know what you can and can't do. I know the municipal laws regarding finance. I know about procurement and the things that you can and can't do there. So I bring that to the table.
Okay. And Keith, having been on it, I mean, you were there when they went through the capital plan, which that $20 million, I'm sure, is more than $20 million at this point, because it's gone up. So, in the idea of bringing new revenue in, what can the council do, I guess, is the problem. I mean, you need business growth, but what can the council do to help business growth?
I think we get faced with that question a lot,
Yeah.
and, people will come to the council and say, well, you should go invite, or get this business to come into this space. And I think when it comes to government and business development, there's a line there you got to be careful not to cross, because if you're inviting businesses in that, out there that are competing with businesses here, people will say that government is intercepting and working against them. But I think the things we can do is, I still feel we can streamline making the process easier for businesses. I don't know if that's actually going to bring more businesses in. One of the problems is our commercial tax rate is considerably higher than our residential tax rate. Fortunately, the property values are still low, but that's going to come back at some point and really bite us, because as properties increase, and they will increase, I think we're seeing as interest here is growing, those property values are going to go up. And right now, your commercial rate is tied into your residential rate. So for every dollar we raise residential, commercial is going up $2 to $3, and it's I think the highest, might be one of the highest commercial rates in the state. Yeah. Not Bill, but it is one of the highest rates. So I don't know how we're going to turn that back, because the residents aren't going to want to say, hey, we'll raise our taxes more so you can cut commercial. They're not going to want that. But I think streamlining and just being more of a business-friendly attitude. But, we're competing with a lot of communities that are doing the same thing.
Right. So, Roger, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I think one of the things that we need to educate the public on is we're never going to get a Sprague's here. We're never going to get a GE here. But we might get small technology companies, small medical devices and things of this sort. We have to think to the future. What's the business going to look like in the future? And the people that have come here find it a very attractive place, not only to live, but to bring employees back into North Adams, their own employees. So I think that's one of the things we should try to look at. When I say we have to involve the powers that are, the mayor, in trying to develop this type of business. We certainly have the space for it.
It's true. So Lisa, what do you think? Obviously the council is limited in what it can do, as Keith pointed out. You want to get growth. So what would you see your role as being on the council in terms of helping develop growth and attracting people to this community?
Well, I think you have to be a salesperson wherever you go. So if you're at you're in Boston, you're in Cambridge, you're in Charlton, you're in Northampton, and you talk to people, you can always talk about just what a great place it is to live and work, and how we've got natural beauty, we've got tourism, both in the arts and in the culture and in the recreation. So that level. The other thing we had done is we started to streamline the process so that it was not as difficult to get to move through the process. And we kind of tried to make it so that you knew what the steps were, where before it seemed very arbitrary to people. We have to be open to things. And I remember a while back there was a factory that was going to move here, and there was so much negative social media that they ended up pulling out, and that doesn't do the city any good. I think there's been some positive examples of what Dave Morazi's done with the NORAD mill, but what he's done with other properties where he's turned them into 2 and 4, apartment market rate apartments and rehab some properties. I think that's important. I think Roger's right that small technology, small light manufacturing, which is not polluting, and is going to create 5 and 10 and 20 jobs, as opposed to we're not going to have an organization that's going to have 4,000 jobs. It's just that day is gone. It's gone in the Northeast. It's probably gone in the U.S. Definitely, but it's not an issue. It's not something that's going to come back. And you can talk to the whole northern tier of Massachusetts, where you call it the post-industrial economy is what we are, and we have to find that. I do think we have a real asset in McCann. Their CAD program and their the things that they're doing there are amazing, and I think we have to get the word out. But the other problem is sometimes, GE's got over 200 jobs available.
General Dynamics.
General Dynamics. I'm
I know
sorry.
it's easy
General
to
Dynamics.
get them confused.
It is, because my dad was laid off from GE the day before his wedding, so I've lived the GE cycle, sort of. But if we can, there's a disconnect between the skills of our workforce and the skills needed, and we need to work on that, and that's something. It's obvious. Is that something the council knows? Can we be supportive of programs? Can we be supportive at the state legislature? Can we advocate with the legislature to fund these programs? Yes. What can we do day in and day out? We can be an open and stable government, because that's one of the things that companies look for when they move to an area. They want a stable government. They don't want something that's going to change every 2 years and then change policies when they're in the middle of trying to build.
We haven't really seen that, right? We're having open seats this time around because 3 people have decided not to run. So do you think, Keith? Do you think we have a stable government? What do you?
We've changed, the administration office,
Right,
so that's
right.
fairly new, and I think there's always some hiccups and bumps as a new administration takes over of how they work with the rest of the government, how they work with their department, how they work with council. Overall, I think it's been going okay. I feel the communication lines have a little more static than they did, 4 years ago.
Right, that's an issue that came up at a recent city council meeting.
It
where,
is.
Councilors were feeling they were being left out of certain decisions or not.
Correct,
being-
and it's part of, I guess, understanding also where our duties, our responsibilities, and sometimes we may have gotten spoiled with the previous administration that, he brought us into more things than he really had to.
It's a little bit of a whipsaw between administrations where you
Yeah,
get more or
you
you
know,
don't.
I mean, you look at the past 3 administrations, they all have their own
Very
ways.
different,
They're different.
right.
And like I say, the council, I think one of the difference was the last administration was a city councilor. So I think when he came in, he appreciated and understood what the
Right.
council was more about and involved us more. Mayor Bernard definitely runs it a little different. And, again, if you look at our responsibilities, they're probably here. But then if but if you look at what councils do outside of that responsibility, it's much bigger. As Councilor Blackmer said, when you're in Boston or when you're at these areas, when you're networking, you're selling the city, you're being an ambassador. That's not particularly on the books of what that is our job, but that is an important part of what you want in a counselor, is someone who can sell the city, someone who loves the city, someone, and I mean, that's what I do with the store every day,
Right.
is when the visitors come in, I don't always know where they are, but I'm selling it. The other day I was selling the city to someone, and he's like, "Oh, I just bought I own the building on Ashland Street." He bought the DeLago building. So, I got into that discussion, and he's from New York, and he was up visiting, and we had a long talk. But, and they do love the city.
I apologize for that.
We turned our phone off.
I normally have my phone off, but I was waiting for a phone call from Roger, and so I left it on.
A follow-up to that,
Yeah.
and I don't mean, there are some cities, and I don't think this has happened in North Adams, where philosophically
Yeah.
there's a difference between administrations, and in that you see that go back and forth, and it keeps changing. I don't think we've had a lot, although we had a big turnover in 2013. We had a big, decent-sized turnover in 2015 and 2017. So there was years where you might get one new person or two new people. When I first came on, I was the only new person. In 2009, we had 3 or 4 of us. So it's been the last 10 years, 10, 12 years, there's definitely been a larger turnover. And I do think what happens is people come in with this idea of what they want to do, and not, some people definitely with an activist mentality,
Right.
but also they feel like they have a seat at the table, but they don't understand their seat at the table is not a seat at the executive table.
Right.
And it's a legislative body, and they don't really understand how that, basically in comparison, we operate as town meeting. So if you want to be an executive and you want input and you want to do all these things, then you either run for mayor or you move to a town and run for selectman or board of select board.
And I
member.
have seen over the past few turnovers, there has been more debate during council meetings, more, I don't want
More
to say.
than you like.
More than I like sometimes, but there's more voices coming in and talking about before there's a vote. I mean, you see a lot of deliberation. You want to say it's not argumentative, though sometimes it gets a little on that side, but there is certainly much more deliberation, I think, than there had been in the past on certain items. Maybe there's too much sometimes. I mean, they tend to get very long, but it's also good to see people who are elected to a legislative body like this, really discussing and airing things out so that voters can see what it is they're doing. So Roger?
One of the things I think we might consider in the future or the near future is getting more public input, more input from our own citizens.
Yeah.
By that I mean having a public forum. Here's what we'd like to see. What are your thoughts on it? What are your problems with it? There are people who feel disenfranchised.
Yeah.
If something is happening in the city and they don't know anything about it, and I don't mean that they don't. I don't mean that these things aren't communicated by the press or by the news media, but for example, I don't know how many people watch the city council meetings.
Yeah. And they should.
And if you look at the audience in the council meetings, unless there's something critical coming up, it's slim.
Right. It tends to be the very same people, and Roger's one of them.
Yes.
So yeah, so how do you do that? Because obviously you have open meeting law, you have council rules that partially limit participation because the council is there to do the council business that the voters have elected
Right.
them to do. So it's not like town meeting where somebody can stand up and talk for 20 minutes about a certain issue. You have to, right, but so how do you give people time? So how do you give people
That's
time
where
to
I
talk?
think having a diverse council where there's counselors that cover many different areas of the community, they're networking throughout the community. So if they're involved in a business group, they're involved in youth groups or senior groups, or and they're hearing those conversations more in a social, casual setting, they can bring that back. And then obviously today, how much of it's true, but social media is, you can see and hear a lot of opinions, and you do have to sift through that to find who's just mad and venting versus the real concerns and complaints. And, you know, a lot of times I'm copying social media concerns, real ones, you know, that I feel real, and I will email them off and send them to departments and the
Right.
mayor and say, hey, just to let you know, and it's not my job to tell DPW, go fill in the potholes, but I will forward that complaint over and hopefully it gets taken care of.
Okay. So we'll talk, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was going to add something. I mean, I think there's a real difference between constituent services and doing the business at the council. And I know several years ago we ran into that kind of problem, particularly I think the hospital closing brought on a lot of it. But, and so we actually did the workshop with the city solicitor, John DeRosa, and Al Martin came in and kind of facilitated, because we had so many new counselors who kind of came in with an idea of what so things were coming up at council meetings in an inappropriate manner,
Right.
based on all the, you know, public meeting law and all that. And so I think that's it. I mean, most of my comments I get are when I go to the grocery store. That's when everybody talks to me. Some people, sometimes it's the dump, or the landfill, or the transfer station, or whatever we call it this week. But that's where you get a lot of that. And sometimes it's just, when there is a big issue, we do have public hearings, and people say, well, and you'll say, well, we had it was on iBerkshire's. Well, I don't do the internet. It was on WNAW. Well, I don't listen to the radio. Oh, it was in the Berkshire Eagle. Well, I don't read the paper. I honestly, then sending
Right.
12,000
Right.
residents a personal invitation, what else am I supposed to do?
As a citizen, it's partly your responsibility as a citizen to make sure you're at least abreast of certain things that are happening. You might miss stuff, but it's your job to keep yourself informed. I always say that. So let's talk a little bit about what you guys want to do. And I'm going to start with Roger. If you get elected, is there anything in particular in mind that you would like to see happen, or you feel is important to you that you're going to work on?
Oh, I think there's a number of things. One that comes to my mind immediately because of what I've been doing is historic preservation.
Right.
We have a lot of history in this area, and people don't understand it and don't know it. So there are certain things that we could do to involve the public in that area, and involve one of our assets, the college. When have we gotten the college to participate in a forum?
Which is interesting, because Williams College is running several forums
Exactly.
about, the college and the community, and they're doing some of them here in North Adams, which is, yeah.
I mean, at one point, maybe when the city was larger, that might have been a problem, but, we're shrinking. So if we can involve those folks, and Williams, Williams they have an outreach program as well. But I think some of the people say, well, nobody listens to us.
Yeah.
And that's partly their fault because they don't know who to talk to. I think counselors have to be aware that the public should be able to contact them, should be able to talk to them, and
Right.
lecture them in some cases, but be open to this, be receptive to it. There's more to being a counselor, I believe, than sitting in a council meeting.
So that's you want to be more involved in, some of the things that are happening in the city. And
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You get a
And-
feel
and
for
listen
what
to
people
people,
are
yeah.
thinking.
Okay.
And after all, these are the people that pay the taxes. These are the people that vote.
Very true. Well, Lisa, would you like to? What do you have in mind?
Well, I think along the lines, we had a lot of input. We went into all the neighborhoods, into places where people actually were, because I understand that if you've got kids, you can't always get to meetings. When we did the vision,
Oh, the vision 2030. Yeah.
2030, and that was that was what, 5 years ago now,
Right.
4 or 5 years ago. Now it's time to maybe take a look at that and see what we've done, what we haven't done, and where we need to go. Obviously, the capital plan needs some work, needs some revision, and not to start the bag ban. I wouldn't have started with a bag ban if I wanted to do something for the environment. But what I would do is look at a styrofoam ban. And I remember I was talking to Mayor Alcombright about it, and he said, "Oh, the Board of Health's working on that." So I said, "Okay, that's their purview," and I kind of let it go. And then I realized that they never did anything with it, and then I was on my way out of the council, so I wasn't going to bring something up and drop it in an incoming council's lap, because that's happened to me a few times, and I don't particularly care for it. So that's something I would look at bringing back, because I think it's less invasive, and less expensive. And all of these chains are already, if they have to provide non-styrofoam at Dunkin' Donuts and McDonald's and Cumbies in Pittsfield, which they
Right.
do have a styrofoam ban, then it's not that big of a deal for them to do it for us. It's the smaller ones I'm a little worried about. But we passed one in Buckland, and we've got 900 people or 1,900 people, and only several small businesses that are a big bulk of our downtown. They're all restaurants. So.
Okay. How about you, Keith? What are you thinking this time around that you'd be?
I don't know if there's a lot of changes of what our main issues have been in the past. Our capital projects are important, and they just sort of keep sitting there in limbo. And the cash flow, while we have a little bit more in reserves, I mean, the police department, we're putting a new roof on the police and fire, the public safety
right.
building, but in reality, we need a new public safety building, and that's, a chunk of money that, the administration, I'm not sure where they're at with it on how, seriously they're out there looking for new space or, so I'm concerned that the new roof is really going to be a Band-Aid that's going to say, okay, we fixed that. We're okay now for several years. We do know that the Greylock School is something that's going to be coming up, and I think we have to look at the whole school system and say, how do we do that? Is it a case of do we need an entire new school? We know the student population is dropping, and I think we think it's still going to be dropping. So part of that falls on the school committee, but that is a big chunk of finances that will come to the council. It's right now we've been applying for it, but at one point the state may say, okay, you got your money for your feasibility study, and there's going to have to be some thought into that.
Right.
And it may have changed. I mean, I think when we were doing the Colgrove School, we looked at Greylock and said, that one can wait 10 years and we'll get to that. But I think the school design is different now. I mean, you're talking more regionalization and things
Right.
like that. And then, the infrastructure, I think why we had the 2030 vision plan, there was a 20-year infrastructure plan. And
Which is
I think
now
we're 10
almost
years
8
into that.
Yeah, at least 8 years.
And
it's been
other than
since I've-
replacing
right.
some fire hydrants here and there, I'm not really sure we've done a whole lot. And
Yeah.
again, it's finances.
Right. Okay, so we're coming up on time, so I'm going to give everybody a quick time to tell me why they should vote for you. Roger, why should people vote for you?
Well, thank you very much for
You're
getting me
welcome.
first.
You got 2 minutes.
One of the things that I want to try to do, if I am on council, is to make sure that I'm open to hearing the public. I think I've expressed that a little bit in
Yeah.
what I was saying before. Too many times a councilor is considered a person, well, he's got his own ideas, or he's in league with this one or that one, and we can't get through. I want to have open communications with the people that I serve. And that wouldn't be just the people where I live, it's the entire city.
Right.
We don't have districts that we live in a certain area, but we're responsible for the entire city. And I want to make sure that I do that.
Okay.
And I think you do that with better communication.
All right, great. Lisa?
So I'm Lisa Blackmer. You should vote for me because the 10 years that I was on the council, I took my time and energy and I researched the issues. I listened to what people had to say, even if they weren't people that generally were people that I might agree with. And I even was known to change my mind on an issue in the middle of a city council meeting. I have the education, the experience, and the enthusiasm to serve the residents of the city, to continue on this positive trend we're taking and make this an even better place to live, work, and play, and to govern properly with my background in municipal government, finance, and nonprofits, and the fact that I raised my family here and I want to stay here, and I'd love to see them move back someday.
Keith? You guys are going really fast.
I
so
know.
you're going
I get 5 minutes. No.
Now you get 5 minutes, yeah.
I've been on the council, and I think maybe other than some new residents,
Yeah.
I would hope the majority have seen, what I've done on the
Yeah.
council, what I've done in the community, and that wins me back their support if I lost it,
Yeah.
or it continues their support. What I find more important about just electing me is to really look at, when you're looking at that ballot, to consider the whole council and to consider diversity, I think, is a broad word these days.
Yeah.
Some people think it's about race and, sex and age, and it's about philosophies too, of how people think and where money and funding should go. I encourage people to vote, not that you have to, but to vote 9 candidates. I really do. And because there's 9 seats there, so do your homework and really figure out the 9 candidates you want. Don't go from top to bottom, even though, yes, I know that benefits me.
Right.
But seriously, there are people that are at the bottom list that deserve a vote as much as there are in the middle and the top. So I think it's really important for people to pay attention, and if they don't know who are these candidates, ask someone else until you find out who they are, because just because maybe you missed them here or you missed them at some public event, or they don't go out and they're not as public, doesn't mean they're not going to be a good candidate to sit on the council.
Yeah, and most of the candidates should be fairly easy to find. We've been running an article called Debates and Forums, which we'll be updating it especially as we post these two, to let you know when you can watch them, and any forums or candidate forums that are going to be happening over the next few weeks. The election is on November 5th, and for City Council, you can vote up to 9 candidates.
If you vote 10, it gets canceled.
No,
But people do that. And if you vote 10, your ballot is nothing.
Right, so don't vote for that 10th person. Vote only for 9 people who you'd like to see on the City Council. We're still going to have a little bit more time. You guys were so fast wrapping up. I thought you would give a little more.
Well,
Any
I'd like
last
to go
words somebody
back to
like
the
to
ballot,
give?
though, that people, they also can write in if they really want.
They can write in if they want
It's
to,
a
yes.
slim chance, but
Yes.
you can write in. But again,
Yeah.
if you write someone in, it counts as one of those 9. So
Right.
again, the only reason, because there have been ballots that have been thrown out, and I do believe, and you guys correct me wrong, but I think there's going to be a tight election for a group of candidates, and I think it's going to be much tighter than the past. Last election, the number 1 to the number 9 were within 700. I think it's going to be maybe 500, and I think a bunch are going to be even tighter than that. So I think every vote really does count in this election.
So how are you guys feeling about the election? Good?
I
Back?
feel good about it, but I
Okay.
agree with what Keith is saying. People do your homework, see a candidate, talk to a candidate. If that's a person that you think can do the job for the city, vote for them.
Right. Any last words? We're running out the clock here.
So yes, I think it's important to vote. I think people say that it doesn't matter, but I think you have the most impact on your government at the local level. So it's most important actually that you vote here in the city where it impacts your life on a daily basis.
Right. Very good. And with that, we are done with this episode. Join us for our next episode when we talk the next set of city council candidates.